Do you ever have a project where it just feels like the quilting goddess has shined down upon you, giving you that perfect project for pattern, fabric, and challenge, and the time you have available? Well, that's what happened this year for me with my Declutter Challenge quilt. So stick with me and I'll show you how I did it. Hi, I'm Karen Brown of Just Get It Done Quilts. I give you tips, tricks, and strategies to help you make the quilt that you want to make. And if you like what you see, please click that subscribe button. Every year during the Declutter Challenge, I ask participants to reward themselves for finishing a task by working on a UFO or a small project or something that just makes them happy for 15 to 30 minutes each day. And honestly, this year I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I was waiting for my fabrics for my maple and eucalyptus quilt, so I only wanted a short-term project until they arrived. All through this past autumn at my local quilt shop, I had seen the Alentejana quilt. It's by Ships and Violins, and you might have remembered my interview with Christine de Miranda on Karen's Quilt Circle. Well, that pattern kept talking to me until I finally purchased it with a gift card that my friends had given me for my birthday. Funny thing was, I wasn't that keen to make it in solids. And the Declutter Challenge for me is more about using up scraps. And then I opened up my fabric cupboard and there was the remains of a half-yard bundle of Cider by Basic Gray. I had previously used these fabrics to make my Jelly Roll Block number 5 quilt from this video here, and my Lemonade quilt. And the label says it all, which meant that I had a piece about 10 inches by width of fabric in each fabric left over. Not necessarily scrap fabric, but definitely remnants. Now, if I wanted to follow the pattern for the throw size quilt, I would need 6 fabrics, just over a half-yard cut to a 1.5 yard cut, which I didn't have. But I thought if I grouped my fabrics together by value, I might be able to make it work. It was my kind of quilting puzzle, and I couldn't wait to get started. The pattern is well laid out. It gives you instructions for cutting strips, which then you sew together, and then you cut into slices, and then you sew those back together, which you combine together to make rows. Then you sew the rows together to make the quilt top. However, because of my fabric limitations, I needed to work backwards. I needed to identify where the fabrics would lie, find the rows, then the blocks, and then figure out if I had enough fabric. And some fabrics I found too busy for the small scale pieces in the quilt top. And some fabrics I would need to fussy cut to keep a consistent value in the strip. It really lent itself to the Declutter Challenge well, as I could do a bit every day and then put it away. Now, I know some of you are thinking that I was crazy, and it did take a lot of brain power, but it tickled my brain and I loved every minute of it. And there was this magic as it all came together. And by the end of the 21 days, I was finished. And in the spirit of using what I have, I dug out this 2-yard cut of Tim Holtz fabric for the back. Unfortunately, I stalled at the quilting stage. I hadn't finished any tops in a while, and I was worried that my skills were a bit rusty. And I really didn't want to do a pantograph, which might compete with the quilt design. And there are a lot of small pieces in this quilt top, and I like to choose a quilting design that secures them all down. So it sat in its project bag for a while until I finally gave myself a kick and loaded it on the long arm. And then it sat on the long arm for a month Well, I waited for my quilting goddess to shine her light on me again. Back at my sewing machine, I was busy making the maple and eucalyptus blocks. And I realized as I was finishing off the last few of them that I was going to need my long arm soon to make that quilt top. So I pushed myself just to start. I took a deep breath and decided that I would just follow the design in the fabric on the first one and make these diamonds. The next row was a bit of a struggle as I found my rhythm. I did these stars. It's an old standby from a workshop that I did with Melissa Marginette, but honestly, it became a lot easier from there. I tried a curve, but it didn't really work for me. But soon I found the repeat. And then I did several passes, just reducing the size inside. When I lost the diamonds, I experimented with this Art Deco shape, but I didn't realize it was Art Deco until I had done it. I echoed the diamonds and made more stars. And luckily, the second half of the quilt is just a repeat of the top. I took extra care with this quilt to be sure that my piecing aligned with the horizontal and the vertical. And it was really helpful that I had channel locks for this step. I had one last oops as my batting was too short and I had to splice in a strip at the end. And one last pass with the motif that I started with. And funny, I was positive that I had missed a spot or two on my first pass, but it turned out I didn't. So it's time to trim this baby up and get it squared. I had hoped to use some of my remaining fabric for the binding, but they were just too busy and had no impact. My second choice was some grunge in this peacock blue or the navy that I had used in the quilt. But back in January, when I went searching for it, it seemed to be sold out everywhere. So I ordered 2 other colors and took them for a test drive. I find the trick with binding is to fold it to the actual size that you intend to use and see how it interacts with the fabrics in your quilt top. And for me, this bison works the best. It brings out the browns and the oranges. I'm making a slightly thicker binding at 1/2 inch. So I am cutting my binding strips at 3 inches. And I just do a test just to be sure I've got the right size. A 1/2 inch binding is a bit awkward, but for some quilts, I like the impact that a thicker binding can give. And I explain everything you need to know about binding in the binding series. I don't quite have everything set up in my studio to sew. I'm really missing my 3-in-1 binding tool, and I don't have my Geeky Bobbin binding chart either, and I lost Binding Chicken. And I start sewing my binding to the bottom of the quilt as I'm wanting to use this orange for contrast when I fold it over to the top. And lastly, I brought out my embroidery unit for the first time. After my lesson at Bernina, I'm going to give it a try. Not perfect. I should have used a thicker stabilizer. Lesson learned for the next time. It has personally been a challenging first quarter of the year, but I'm hoping that this is a turning point. And what a better way to start than with a quilt finish. And I know it seems like Mando wants this one for him. I am claiming this quilt for me. And now I get to load my maple and eucalyptus on the long arm. And if you want to see how this one turns out, stay tuned. If you have yet to do your own declutter challenge, I'm going to leave a link to that playlist right here. And if you would like to listen to my interview with Christina de Miranda of Ships and Violins, I'll leave a link to that podcast here. Take care and I'll see you next time.